Sour Heart. I was going to read this book as part of the book club, and I'm so glad I didn't because this book sucked, and I wouldn't want anybody else to read it. This book's probably a 0 out of 5, maybe the first 0 out of 5 for this video series. Really just a piece of shit. Not a great book at all. I constantly, man, I didn't even finish it. I think... And I watched some other reviews because, I mean, the book YouTube is great because it's so great to see what other people thought, particularly in the case where I'm not doing it as part of my book club, so I can't review it with people I know in person who've read it. But we got 4 hours left, so I made it to the start of chapter 7, which is... How far is that? How long is it? I guess I'm halfway through? So I'm in the middle of chapter 7. Oh no, I'm really far. Okay, I'm at chapter 7 out of 10. So I'm 70% done with it, and I don't want to read another minute. It's pretty bad. I think the main problem with this book is there's no pull. There's no plot pull. It very much feels like a collection of different stories which are loosely assembled in the form of a chronology. Basically, the first story is the first one that happened, and the last story is presumably the last one that happened. However, not worth it, and not a great way to write a story by default, particularly when there is no relevancy to the order. When you're in a situation like that, you always want to order the book in the most interesting way, because who gives a shit if this happened first or the other thing if it doesn't matter, right? And man, this book needs an editor. This book needs an editor like a starving man needs something to eat, because it's a mess. It's way too long, way too long, incredibly boring at points, and it really needs that plot pull. So this is something very creative that is happening in the book we just read recently called The Boys in the Boat, where it'll have a character who does something and then he'll say, this would be the last time he did this thing. Or this would be the first time he did this thing, but not for long. Or he would regret this decision in less than 2 years when he realized it was final. Something like that, right? It's suddenly like, oh, what is this? What is that? When is this going to have repercussions? When are we going to look back on this point in the story and remember it? Really beautifully done in that book. In this book, there's nothing going on there. It's a mess. There was a few parts where it did sort of course, Stanford Girl. Love that, right? We always love Stanford popping up in our stories. But there was a few moments, vignettes, that did stand out to me just because it had a relationship to my own life. Obviously, she's a daughter of immigrant parents, which I am as well. So I had that relationship there. But also there's this section in chapter 6 where her brothers want to play with her. Her brother wants to play with her, and he puts his hands under the door, and she like hits his hands. And man, that really hurt me because I care so much about my little brothers, and you know, I love it when they want to spend time with me, and so I thought that part was particularly emotionally resonant. And then another part is she used to scratch at night, and I dated for a while this woman who had eczema, and I would buy her these little mittens for her to put on her hand so she wouldn't scratch at herself at night. And you know, I cared a lot about her, so I think I was remembering that, and so there was emotional resonance that was coming up there as well. This book is really good at showing flaws in the narrator, unlike Educated. We read Educated quite recently, which is, again, a memoir about this woman who's growing up in this family. And in that book, man, that lady could do no evil. She doesn't talk at all about her mistakes. It's always the issues that everybody else did. But in this book, this woman's much more humble, and she's constantly talking about where she fell short as a sister, as a daughter. And I think that's awesome, and that's a good that there's some self-reflection there. I love this. I love this line. It really stood out to me. There would come a point where we would think as families as the ones we made rather than the ones we are from. Wow. Beautiful. So poignant. So resonant, right? I mean, what a concept. This idea that, hey, who's your family? Oh, at some point it's the people who raised you. But at a different point, it's the people who you made, right? It's your kids rather than your parents. I think that's fascinating, and I think there's something really interesting to dive into there. And then there's also this moment that was resonant with me where there's this electric racket, and it's sort of like terrifies her, but also she's got this draw to it, and she decides to take this electric racket, which is used for bug swatting essentially, and she buries it, or she gets rid of it in some way. And I did the same thing with the spoon. In my parents' house, my father would always beat me with this one particular spoon. And so at some point when I was an adult, I returned to my house, and I took the spoon, and I threw it out. And I was like, fuck that guy. And I feel like there was a similar moment there where I could really have a connection with the author, and sort of we had the same experience there. Again, every chapter is sort of focused on something else, but what's really lacking, I think, is a coherent plot to bring it forward. There isn't a lot of pull in this story, and I'm not going to recommend it to anybody. This is a 0 out of 5. Not a great book.